podcast.
Chill out, bro.
Hey, man,
Chill. Hey, why you putting your hands on him?
Hey.
Why you arresting him? Why you putting handcuffs on him?
The jaywalking arrest of 2 black teenagers in Oklahoma is now under review. Newly released video from the Tulsa Police Department shows the teens walking in the street, then confronted by police on foot and in a car. The situation seems to escalate quickly. Now the officers' actions are being investigated.
Let him go!
Anybody with a heart, they know that's wrong. You don't do that to a human being. You don't even do that to an animal. His life matters. All our lives matter. Black lives matter.
An emotional round of testimony on Capitol Hill. George Floyd's brother telling members of Congress, quote, "Enough is enough." What does police reform look like? The debate taking place across the country tonight after the Minneapolis City Council said it is getting rid of its existing police department so it can build a new model for public safety. We'll look at the reforms that were already made in Minneapolis and how things got to where they are now. Reviewing our history as protests force a new reckoning about racism in America, President Trump today said he will not even consider renaming military bases named for Confederate commanders. We'll take a closer look. Cases on the rise. With nearly 2 million confirmed COVID-19 cases in the U.S., at least 20 states are experiencing a surge. Now hospitals in many regions have been seeing a rise in patients since Memorial Day. And bringing back sports, the head of Major League Soccer joins us to talk about the league's big plans to return to the pitch. Good evening, and thanks for streaming with us. I'm Diane Macedo in for Lindsay Davis, and we begin tonight with the issue currently at the forefront of national debate: police reform. After more than 2 weeks of protest following the death of George Floyd, a number of police departments across the country have announced new measures. In Buffalo, where a violent interaction with a protester caused outrage, today the mayor announced a number of new efforts, shifting policing, quote, away from enforcement and to a restorative model that promotes stronger community bonds. And in Minneapolis, where the head of the police union compared protesters to terrorists, the police chief today announced an end to negotiations with the union. But in a city where the mayor was booed away from a rally after he said he's against abolishing the police department, the future remains uncertain now that the city council has moved to do just that. So we're going to begin tonight by taking a closer look at the Minneapolis Police Department, the recent reforms it has already tried, and where the city goes from here. Our Alex Perez reports.
Something that's found in this space.
Protests in the Twin Cities, demanding answers from police, and calling for change. Only this isn't 2020, it's 2016, when Philando Castile was fatally shot by a police officer in a Minneapolis suburb while reaching for his ID at a traffic stop. His girlfriend live-streamed the encounter as she and her young daughter were in the car watching the horror unfold.
And the officer just shot him in his arm.
In the nearly 4 years since, many feel the reform efforts by police and local leaders have fallen short. With George Floyd's death, now evidence of that. According to this 2019 report from the Urban Institute tracking the efforts of 6 cities to improve their policing policies, Minneapolis has made major changes since 2016, including shifting its use of force policy to prioritize sanctity of life, requiring officers to intervene in situations where other officers use excessive force, and requiring officers to start their body cams the moment they respond to 911 calls. It's also increased transparency by tracking race and gender during stops and reporting use of force and arrest statistics online. But some experts say improvements like these don't do enough to address the deeper systemic issues in law enforcement.
The idea of police officers using violence against African Americans, Black and brown bodies has much more to do than just the implicit bias they harbor as a police officer. It is part of the fabric of our very nation. So much of our criminal legal system and our other institutions in this country, you can draw an unbroken thread thread between them and slavery. And that definitely plays out in the way that police officers interact with Black and brown individuals.
And the increased transparency has revealed a disturbing disparity. While Minneapolis is roughly only 20% Black, Blacks account for nearly 60% of all use of force cases since 2015, according to the city's own data. And Black people were 7 times more likely to have force used against them than white people, according to that public data. Efforts from city and local leaders to improve officer training have also faced pushback by the city's police union and its leader, Bob Kroll. The union president penning a letter to members characterizing the protest as a terrorist movement and claiming that politicians are using cops as scapegoats. Last year, the union offered warrior-style police training online, even after Mayor Jacob Fry banned it.
That union bind is, we are together, we're a brotherhood, we're going to stick together no matter what. Well, you can't stick together in this situation. You need to stand up and say something that this is wrong. We're not going to tolerate it. And if you want to be a police officer in Minneapolis, you are not going to do this.
Police Chief Madaria Arredondo announcing today that the department will now withdraw from union negotiations and perform a comprehensive review of the contract.
Does the union protect bad cops?
I think the union has a historical obligation to look after their employees and fight for them. My thoughts as chief is that when we have employees who are engaged in misconduct, and they should no longer be wearing this badge and serving our communities, I think the union plays a significant role in helping to contribute to the public trust. But they have to stand up, they have to be doing that. And so we're going to be taking an absolute look at that.
You kind of answered it, but I'm not sure you did. You said the union protects its employees, but do they protect bad cops?
At times, absolutely they have. Absolutely they have.
Looking for concrete solutions and fearful Floyd's death wouldn't change the status quo, protesters sounded the battle cry to defund the police department, usually a call to reduce police budgets. Those cries were met with swift action by the Minneapolis City Council, who announced plans Sunday to officially disband the police force.
Again, our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department.
The decision has sparked major controversy as tensions remain high. Minneapolis Mayor Fry taking heat the day before that for voicing his opposition to abolishing the police force altogether, favoring deep structural reform. But with a majority of city council in favor of disbanding the police department and replacing it with an alternative model to protect the public, the mayor can't veto, and the ball is now in their court, and they are adamant that there's a better way to ensure the city's safety.
We're going to create a fear-free future where every life is truly protected and respected.
Brooklyn College professor Alex Vitale, who has written about the need to defund police departments across the country, says there has been a need to shift funds from policing to community-based alternatives for quite some time.
I don't think this is about starting with flipping some switch and then there's no police and then we figure out what to do. What I'm suggesting is that we start developing specific community-based interventions in consultation with communities that we think will produce public safety in ways that will allow us to reduce our reliance on policing.
Camden, New Jersey is arguably one of the nation's biggest success stories of doing just that. After years of struggling with crime, the city dismantled its police force in 2013 and made the shift toward community policing to rebuild trust with residents. The result? In 2017, the police reported the lowest murder rates the city has seen since 1987. Officers are trained to reach for their guns or handcuffs only as a last resort.
So it was holding people accountable, saying what we mean and meaning what we say to the community. And all of this, from the doing pop-up barbecues and ice cream giveaways on corners to showing people that we hold our officers accountable, every single one of those interactions were deposits into the relationship account with the community.
But some critics caution that defunding police departments too soon could cause more harm than good.
I think that certainly abolishing and defunding police departments is counterproductive and incredibly unpopular, and puts a lot of people who depend on police for public safety at risk. And those people generally aren't the ones advocating for defunding police departments. If we could provide services for mental health care so cops weren't called, cops would love that. The problem is we're not providing those services, and cops are called because no one else is there to do the job. And the idea that services will magically fill the gap, even if funded better, we don't see that. What we need to do is not put the cart in front of the horse. Let's set up those social services. And as soon as demand for police drops, then we can talk about fewer cops.
The Minneapolis City Council has yet to release further details or a timeline for dissolving the police force. For now, the city has officially banned the use of chokeholds and has required other officers to report when excessive force is used during a police stop and can face discipline for failing to intervene.
I think these last 4 years between Philando Castile's murder and George Floyd's have shown us that police reform doesn't go far enough. And this groundswell of public demonstrations, obviously not just in Minnesota, but across this country, have called for transformational change.
Still a long road ahead to mend the wounds of another Black life lost, and the community still searching for answers.
And Alex Perez joins us now live from Minneapolis. Alex, after speaking with the chief today and hearing his plans for reform, how are things expected to move forward, considering the city council's plans to disband the department entirely?
Well, Diane, the fact of the matter is the city council has overwhelmingly voted to dismantle the police department, but that still may be a long ways ahead. It's unclear how exactly that would happen. It's unclear if the city's charter even allows for that to happen. So the police chief here says despite all that, he's moving forward with making changes to the police department. He says today's changes are just the beginning. He expects to make several announcements in the weeks to come. Diane.
And Alex, I understand you have some new reporting tonight about two of the officers charged in the Floyd case. What do we know?
Yeah, Diane, a couple of things we've learned tonight. One of the rookie officers, Thomas Lane, has posted bail, $750,000, and has been released. You'll remember he's one of the officers that in court through his attorneys shifted blame to Officer Derek Chauvin, the veteran officer who was on the scene. Chauvin is the officer seen in that horrific video on top of Floyd. And also today, Diane, we learned a bombshell of sorts that Chauvin actually was negotiating a plea deal with prosecutors up until May 28th, the moment when prosecutors were about to have a press conference to talk about it. But that plea deal fell through. According to the prosecutor's office who I talked to, they were negotiating a deal for him to plead guilty to federal charges and to plead guilty to murdering George Floyd. But that deal fell through, and as we all know now, he's been charged with second-degree murder. Diane?
All right, Alex Perez in Minneapolis tonight. Alex, thanks. I'm tired of the pain. Those were the words from the brother of George Floyd today on Capitol Hill as he pleaded with lawmakers for new national restrictions on the use of force by police. Here are a few moments from that hearing. Take a listen.
Because of this tragedy, the world is listening now. What do you want them to hear?
I want them to stop hiring corrupted police officers. I know it's no way to figure out who's good and who's bad, but we got to find a way, because your heart has to be big if you're an officer. You just can't use the badge to be able to do what you want to do when you want to do it. You're supposed to serve and you're supposed to protect. I didn't see anybody protecting and serving that day when my brother was on his front, on his chest, hands behind his back, pleading, please, please, I can't breathe. A grown man, 46 years of age, crying for his mom. It just hurt, just looking all the time. People try to show it to you, figuring it out. They lynched my brother. That was a modern-day lynching in broad daylight.
I want you to know that I'm listening and I am learning and I hear you. Mr. Floyd and Mrs. Underwood Jacobs, I would like to give each of you the remainder of my time to address the committee.
Sitting here, coming to try to tell you all about how I want justice for my brother, I just think about that video over and over again. Felt like 8 hours and 46 minutes. Hurt seeing my brother plead for his life, watching that officer just put his knee on his neck. Just every day just looking at it, being like anywhere. That's all people talk about the rest of my life. That's all I ever see. His kids had to watch that video. He pleaded for his life. He said he couldn't breathe. Nobody cared. Nobody. Those officers, they have to be convicted. Anybody with a heart, they know that's wrong. You don't do that to a human being. You don't even do that to an animal. His life mattered. All our lives matter. Black lives matter.
An emotional day there on Capitol Hill, and while calls for social justice grow louder in the wake of George Floyd's death, there's also renewed focus on Confederate monuments. We've seen a number of statues removed in recent years. In 2017, protesters even removed a monument themselves from the courthouse there in Durham, North Carolina. Tonight, NASCAR has announced it is banning the Confederate flag from all its events and properties, saying the presence of the flag runs contrary to the league's commitment to providing a welcoming and inclusive environment. But today, President Trump weighed in on Twitter, saying he will not even consider renaming military bases with Confederate names. Our Terry Moran has more on that.
For decades, their names have echoed through American military history. Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Hood, Fort Lee. They are among the 10 U.S. Army installations that are proudly named after heroes of the Confederate Army.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
But now, as protests across the country force a new reckoning about racism in America, some top active and retired military leaders are asking, should the United States Army continue to honor men who fought against the United States, who fought to defend slavery? Today, President Trump weighed in on Twitter. It has been suggested, he declared, that we should rename as many as 10 of our legendary military bases, such as Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Hood in Texas, Fort Benning in Georgia, etc. These monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom. The United States of America trained and deployed our heroes on these hallowed grounds and won 2 world wars. Therefore, my administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations. Our history as the greatest nation in the world will not be tampered with. Respect our military. Later, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany added this.
The president will not be signing legislation that renames America's forts. We must recognize the sacrifices made by these men and women, some of whom saw Fort Bragg for the last time before they went overseas. We've got to think of the Fort Bragg soldiers that have led humanitarian operations like in Hurricane Katrina and the earthquake in Haiti. We've got to honor what has happened there, not rename it. So that is an absolute non-starter for the president.
But the discussion has already started at the Pentagon, with Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy declaring this week they are open to a bipartisan discussion on the topic of removing Confederate names from the bases. And retired General David Petraeus, who trained and commanded at Fort Bragg, weighed in with an impassioned call to drop the Confederate names. The irony of training at bases named for those who took up arms against the United States and for the right to enslave others is inescapable to anyone paying attention. Now, belatedly, is the moment for us to pay such attention. Over the past few weeks, other symbols of the Confederacy have been challenged. In Richmond, Virginia, a massive statue of Robert E. Lee was ordered to be removed by Governor Ralph Northam. I spoke with Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax about what such a move means.
I think we're seeing change happen at an incredible pace because people have said enough is enough. We've had enough injustice in this world, enough oppression, enough destroying of black and brown bodies, police brutality. People have said enough. They want to write a new chapter of opportunity and of hope hope and of building people and communities up. And that's really what we have the chance to do at one of the toughest moments in world history.
A judge has since issued an injunction preventing the statue from being removed for 10 days. It's all part of the reckoning that's been brought on by the police killing of George Floyd. There's so much hope for a brighter future on those streets, and maybe for a new way of understanding our past. Terry Moran,
and Chief
ABC News.
Correspondent Jonathan Karl joins us now. John, today we heard the press secretary say that this issue of renaming these bases is a non-starter for the president. So even though the Pentagon is looking into it, will this get anywhere?
I think this stops it dead in its tracks, at least while Donald Trump is in the White House. He made it clear that this is something that he has absolutely no interest in seeing happen, that he is steadfastly opposed to. This was some of the most impassioned statements I've heard coming out of this White House on an issue for a while. So there is no way that his defense secretary or the secretary of the Army is going to be going forward with this now.
And John, the president also announced the first campaign rally in months, but the time and place are raising some questions. That rally will be held on June 19th, which is better known as Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery in the U.S. And it'll be in Tulsa, the site of one of the worst race massacres in this country's history. So was the significance of that date and location considered or discussed at all?
Well, we're just hearing about this now. It sure looks to me like it was something that they were not even aware of or looked into. The president, of course, is very eager to get back out on the campaign trail again. Another thing that doesn't seem to be front and center is the question of the continued threat from coronavirus. They are talking about having campaign rallies that are packed. The president wants to have his big crowds again. So those are two issues that apparently don't look to stop him from getting back on the road again.
All right, Jonathan Karl at the White House for us tonight. John, thanks.
Thanks, Diane.
And now to the new concerns and new hope around COVID-19. Over 112,000 people have now died from coronavirus in the U.S., and 20 states and Puerto Rico report cases there are still increasing. But there's also new optimism on a possible vaccine. Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman has the details.
Tonight, the U.S. government saying tens of thousands of volunteers will soon receive injections with one of 3 experimental vaccines. Those injections, part of a third phase of vaccine trials this summer, the stage before possible approval. And Dr. Anthony Fauci now saying there are no guarantees, but he's cautiously optimistic about at least one of them working.
We could have a vaccine either by the end of this calendar year or in the first few months of 2021.
Moderna beginning phase 3 trials in July, followed by the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca's vaccine in August, and Johnson & Johnson in September. The goal to test their vaccine safety and effectiveness. That is at least 20 states plus Puerto Rico seeing increases in new cases and 8 states reporting rising hospitalizations. In Texas, hospitalizations jumped 40% since Memorial Day. Officials there say it's too early to tell if that's because of the reopening, the protests, or both. And in Arizona, some experts say it might be time for another stay-at-home order. One doctor telling us they're maxing out of ICU beds.
In mid-May, the projection for COVID deaths was 600.
Right.
Now the projection is 4,500.
Correct.
That's a pretty significant change.
That's an alarming trajectory.
And Matt Gutman joins us now with more. Matt, a vaccine possibly by the end of the year would be great, but how would that work exactly? Would this be ready for everyone or just a select few?
It's a really good question. So what they're doing right now in phase 3 trials is casting an enormously wide net. 90,000 people or so are going to be volunteers for this trial, people from all walks of life, almost all ages. Half of them will be given a placebo. The other half will be given the actual vaccine. And later they'll determine who got sick and who actually shows the antibody. So assuming that one of those 3 vaccines works, then they have to mass produce them. Who gets them? How are they shipped? How quickly can everybody get them? Will it arrive in time for flu season? We don't quite know. That is the goal. I can tell you that some companies like Moderna are more able to be flexible with their vaccines than some of the other companies, but it's going to be all hands on deck. And they'll probably try to roll out as many vaccines to the people who are most vulnerable, especially the elderly, first, and maybe to kids, and then to the rest of the population. So the people who need it most will likely get it first, Diane.
Okay, makes sense. All hands on deck and many fingers crossed, I'm sure. Matt, we heard you talk about that rise in cases in states like Texas and Arizona. Are reopening plans in those states still moving forward? Is there any talk of dialing things back?
They are definitely still moving forward in those states, and there is a possibility, I suppose, of dialing them back. And there are increasing calls from epidemiologists who are watching these curves and saying, you know, it's sustainable if you're okay accepting a certain amount of loss. And to give you an indication, at the end of our piece, we talked to Dr. Sam Durrani, pardon that very loud car, who said, you know, we watched the curve go from an expected 600 total deaths in Arizona to 4,500, and those could increasingly rise. And he is among an increasing number of doctors who are saying, at least for elective surgeries, let's pull back and then discuss where we are and what we should do next. But his goal is protecting human life as much as possible. Diane.
A big job. Matt Gutman for us. Thanks, Matt. And amid the pandemic, forced shutdowns have taken a toll on local economies across the country. But with talk of a possible vaccine still several months away, at least, major cities may now see a double impact as residents debate riding it out or leaving for more space. For Rachel and Rob Garson, New York City has long been their home.
Robert has been here for 10 years. I'm a lifer. I was born and raised in New York City. I've been bouncing around my whole life in terms of location, but I've always found my way back to New York.
But amid the COVID-19 crisis, Rachel and her family are suddenly finding their way out of the city.
We're headed to Miami. That's a way for my children to be able to be outside, live as children, go to great schools, and try to get some normalcy back.
For them, that normalcy started disappearing in early March.
My 3.5, 4-year-old came down with a mystery virus. We took her to the doctor multiple times. They didn't know what was wrong with her. And Rob got sick. So Rob was the second one to get hit. Then my 2 oldest daughters had a weird fever for a day because at that point we were already inside. And then I, in slow motion, watched myself get sick.
They all recovered, but say the combination of being sick with what they think was COVID-19 and then stuck inside a New York City apartment was just too much.
If there's one thing that I learned in business school, it is when something isn't working, we pivot. And worst case scenario, we come back.
The Garsons are not alone. Real estate advisory firm Suburban Jungle says it's seen a major uptick in families leaving cities.
There seems to be this trend of people wanting to leave the city. What are you seeing?
So there has been a mass exodus. So we right now are up over 300% year over year, specifically within this pandemic period. The way that New York is really built, it's, very condensed space. And so the city is really meant to be lived in outside of your apartment walls. And right now, when you lose the amenities of what the city offers, it really becomes difficult.
For music journalist Todd Williams, it has him planning to leave New York for Atlanta next month.
What drove you to leave the city?
The shows, the museums, the restaurants, everything that makes New York feels like it's gone. All the things that made it worth it, that made the small spaces and the high rents worth it, are kind of gone, or at least sort of in question right now. And it's like, without that stuff, why am I here? Especially if I'm stuck in my neighborhood all the time.
Data-driven real estate firm Adlasa reports single millennials are increasingly heading out of America's biggest cities for slightly smaller, more affordable ones.
You have the city, you can actually own a house. There are bars, restaurants, an incredible fun life, for example, in Nashville or Raleigh or Columbus, Ohio. And also you have job options. So why wouldn't you do that?
Global Workplace Analytics also predicts 30% of the workforce will work from home by the end of 2021, up from about 3.5% before the pandemic.
A lot of companies realize that remote work is actually very feasible. It makes a lot of sense to move some of your workforce out of the city.
As for those with no plans to leave their big cities,
what bright spot, what hope do you have for us?
The city is an incredible place, and I think it will forever be an incredible place. And I think, for every person, this is such a subjective experience and decision. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's what's right for you and your family. I think the city will come back better than ever.
Many sure hoping so. When we come back, the heartbreaking reveal. Some new details on those two missing siblings in Idaho. Also, the urgent manhunt for a gunman who opened fire at a police station, and news of a leak of sensitive information involving police officers. And the model's plea deal, how supermodel Bar Raffaelli is avoiding prison in a deal that sends her mother behind bars.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis. 18,000 tons. Patatas. Ismail? David.
For ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home. David, nice to meet you. This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news, and that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now. Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. A bizarre case out of Idaho has taken a grim turn with the discovery of human remains found in the search for two missing siblings. Their mother has been behind bars for months. Now their stepfather is facing charges too. Marcus Moore has the details.
Tonight, the grandparents of two Idaho children missing since September say their bodies have been found. But police not confirming they are the remains of 17-year-old Tylee Ryan and her brother 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, discovered during a search at Chad Daybell's home, their mother's new husband.
We are aware that those remains are the remains of children.
Daybell appearing today before a judge via Zoom, facing 2 felony counts of destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence.
Mr. Daybell, do you understand the allegations on both counts that have been brought against you?
I do. Mom, Lori Vallow, already behind bars after refusing to tell police where the kids were.
Lori, can you tell me where your kids are?
The couple under a cloud of suspicion for months after a string of deaths in the family, marrying in Hawaii weeks after Daybell's first wife died. Vallow's husband killed last summer by her brother, who later died himself. Friends and family insisting Lori changed after meeting Daybell, a religious author. After Lori's arrest, Daybell telling us the kids were safe.
Is there anything that you would like to say to people at all who are, number one, concerned about the kids or concerned about you and your wife? Anything at all you want to say to them? Grateful for any support.
Tonight, JJ and Tylee's family saying, we are filled with unfathomable sadness that these two bright stars were stolen from us, and only hope that they died without pain or suffering.
And Marcus Moore joins us live now. Marcus, this case, it's mind-blowing, really. But as you reported, Chad Daybell is facing 2 felonies related to altering evidence. Do we know if he and Lori Vallow will face new charges connected to the deaths of the children?
Diane, we don't know. Prosecutors have indicated that it's entirely possible that they could come up with additional charges, but at this point, they're only facing what they're being held on right now. And both Daybell and his wife Vallow are each being held on $1 million bail.
And how are the authorities and community reacting to just the constant evolution of this case?
Yeah, I mean, this has truly been a case that's had a number of twists and turns, and certainly there's sadness. Everyone is shocked by the outcome because so many people hoped that these two children are okay, and now they have not been positively identified, but according to the family members, they are indicating, according to the relatives, that the remains that were found were the children, and that is the kind of news that absolutely no one wanted to hear in this case.
Yeah, a sad end to it for sure. Our thanks to Marcus Moore there. Marcus, thank you. And coming up on ABC News Prime, why New York City health officials are getting a lot of attention for their advice on how to be intimate during a pandemic. And later in the show, we'll speak with Commissioner of Major League Soccer. What will professional soccer inside the U.S. look like amid the COVID-19 crisis? But first, our tweet of the day, NASCAR moving to ban the display of Confederate flags at its venues.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him?
I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange.
Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew.
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now, imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Another week in America, a country facing a new test now.
The Wuhan airport, almost no one here.
The last flight out of Rome.
This is the nursing home just outside Seattle. Dozens of people were just rushed off this cruise ship.
This is ground zero.
It is shut down.
Another ambulance just pulled out.
Now they're headed to the hospital.
Time is of the essence.
You can see the ship behind me.
This is the first time tests have been done here.
Morning, afternoon, evening, late night, 24/7. ABC News, there for you.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
Welcome back. The 2020 election is now about 5 months away, and safety concerns during this pandemic has made voting by mail more appealing. But it's also created confusion and concern. We have more reporting to come about Georgia's chaotic primary day. But for now, we take a look at how Americans are expected to vote in November by the numbers. In 16 states, voters must provide an excuse in order to vote by mail. 5 states, Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and Utah, conduct all elections entirely by mail. And now 6 states are preparing to send ballots this fall to every registered voter, including nearly 20 million in California. And a total of 15 states and Washington, D.C. have recently expanded vote by mail due to the pandemic. In the 2016 general election, 20% of voters nationwide voted by mail. Experts predict as many as half, 50% of voters, will mail in their ballots this November. So far this primary season, election experts have seen higher voter turnout in states that make voting by mail easier, and they predict that with more states expanding mail-in voting, we might see record-setting voting participation this November. Still ahead, the investigation's now underway after primary day in Georgia was marred with problems. What this could mean for all of us in November. Plus, we're tracking another line of powerful storms sweeping through the country, and the scathing rebuke directed at the Department of Justice. What this could mean for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. First, here are some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis. 18,000 tons. Patatas. Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Justice has to be served.
Today, George Floyd's brother testifying before Congress.
You don't do that to a human being. You don't even do that to an animal. His life mattered. All our lives matter. Black lives matter.
Here at a House Judiciary Committee hearing on police brutality, held just over 2 weeks after George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis officers. The chairman, Congressman Jerry Nadler, asked Philonez Floyd about his brother's death and why he thinks former officer Derek Chauvin, who's facing second-degree murder charges, pressed his knee into Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Chauvin and 3 other officers charged in the case have not entered pleas.
Personally, I think it was personal because they worked at the same place. So for him to do something like that, it had to be premeditated, and he wanted to do that.
And intentional.
Yes, sir.
As of now, there is no evidence that Chauvin and Floyd knew each other.
The United States is fast approaching 2 million COVID-19 cases. The nation's death toll now topping 112,000, and concern continues to grow over crowded protests ramping up the viral spread. Multiple members of the D.C. National Guard have since tested positive. Right now, 21 states and Puerto Rico are registering a rise in COVID cases. 14 states, including Arizona, have seen their highest 7-day average growth since the pandemic began, and 8 states are seeing a rise in hospitalizations.
You know, right now we're fine, but if we continue at a rate like this, we're facing a significant chance that we're going to have to shut down the state again.
It's the one booking model bar Raffaelli is taking a pass on: jail time. Raffaelli signed a plea deal for tax evasion with Israeli authorities, agreeing to serve 9 months community service. Her mother drew the short straw. She'll serve 16 months in prison. Raffaelli was accused of falsely claiming she lived with her then boyfriend Leonardo DiCaprio in the U.S. rather than Tel Aviv. Prosecutors say she did it to conceal tens of millions of dollars in earnings, despite being one of the highest paid models in the world. She'll now be paying back a few million. New York City is taking things slow, and the city's health officials know for those single and ready to mingle, needs must be met while limiting the spread of the coronavirus. The health department released this guide encouraging unorthodox methods like so-called sexy Zoom calls, as well as wearing face masks, avoiding kissing, and picking open, well-ventilated spaces to find some release. Among the less TV-friendly ideas, this isn't the first time the city has weighed in. At the start of the pandemic, the city raised eyebrows by encouraging solo activities.
Welcome back. The former judge tasked with reviewing the Michael Flynn case is calling the DOJ's request to dismiss his charges a, quote, abuse of prosecutorial power. The court-appointed advisor now says that the presiding federal judge should deny the request. The formal briefing accuses the DOJ's actions of being, quote, corrupt and politically motivated. Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor, pleaded guilty of lying to the FBI during the Russia investigation, then tried to reverse it. The presiding judge paused Flynn's case to hear from outside groups and appointed the advisor to argue against the Department of Justice's motion to drop the case. Flynn was the highest-ranking Trump appointee convicted in the Mueller probe. And a manhunt is now underway after a gunman opened fire near a California police station. An officer was wounded, but not before shooting back. Will Carr has the details.
Tonight, police are on the hunt for an active shooter wanted for attacking a police station in California.
Shot northeast of the building.
Police describe the shooter as a male in his 20s or 30s. They're urging residents to shelter in place. The gunfire erupted early this morning around 3:15 in downtown Paso Robles.
MPD is advising they can hear gunfire coming from the east side of their station.
The gunman shot and wounded a sheriff's deputy in front of the station.
They take the fire. The DMV. Copy taking gunfire on 9th Street at the DMV. Shooting at us. Gunfire is coming from a southerly direction north of the DMV.
That deputy was in serious but stable condition. Later, around 7 a.m., police discovered the body of a man near an Amtrak station less than a mile away from the police department. The victim was shot in the head from close range, and investigators believe this homicide is connected to the shooting this morning.
And Will Carr joins us live now. Will, the sheriff is releasing some new details now about this investigation.
That's right, Diane. They just released a picture of this suspect. He has long curly hair, a dark beard, and appears to be wearing a cross. The sheriff tells me that there is no doubt that he was trying to kill police officers. And in California, just the past couple of weeks, 3 times members of law enforcement have been ambushed and shot just over the past couple of weeks. As for Paso Robles, the downtown area is still on lockdown as members of law enforcement here are combing through 5 separate crime scenes. Diane.
And Will, I understand you're also tracking a disturbing report from Homeland Security about a leak involving sensitive police information. What do we know about that?
That's right. So this is new. This is something called doxing. That's when members of law enforcement's personal information is leaked online. We're talking about their address, their phone numbers, even their descriptions of their personal cars. This has led police officers across the country to really be concerned about their safety and the safety of their families.
All right, Will Carr live for us. Thanks, Will. And now to the election chaos in Georgia tonight. 24 hours after polls closed, several races are still too close to call. This after voters in the Atlanta area endured hours of lines and in some cases a lack of voting machines. Tonight, many fingers are being pointed, but the hope is that lessons will be learned for November. Our Steve Osinsami has more.
State and county election authorities in Georgia tonight are pointing fingers at each other over this, the endless lines of people waiting to vote well past midnight.
6 hours out here. That's how determined I was to make it.
In no other industrialized country in the world is it so difficult to vote so often.
Look at this. Line wrapped around both sides of the church.
Democrats here and across the country are accusing Georgia Republicans of trying to disenfranchise voters.
I feel like maybe it's intentional that it's so difficult to vote in general.
But the biggest problems were mostly in blue counties with election boards run by Democrats. People running the polls didn't know how to use new machines. And in the state's largest county, as blue as the sky, election officials admit that they lost nearly 8,000 requests for absentee ballots. The coronavirus only made things worse. Poll workers, many of them seniors, refused to work the election, afraid they might get sick. And in one county that is majority African American, more than 24 polling places at senior and assisted living centers had to be moved.
And ABC political director Rick Klein joins us now to discuss this. Rick, we've already reported that states around the country really are trying to change election rules to adjust to this pandemic. Is this chaos last night in Georgia a wake-up call for what's to come in November?
Diane, if it could happen in Georgia, it could happen anywhere. And there are real concerns tonight that it could happen everywhere. Virtually every state that doesn't already have mail-in voting has been expanding that. And they're doing it in the age of COVID-19. And the concern is we're a couple of months now into the crisis. Georgia learned significant lessons from states like Ohio and Wisconsin that voted earlier in the process. And still, despite the national focus and attention, despite the resources pumped into the state, they still had a meltdown of an election night. And it might be a harbinger of concerns to come in November.
And Rick, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention because there wasn't a high-profile race there. But in Pennsylvania, more than a week after its primary, officials there are still counting ballots. Now, PA is one of those swing states that could actually tip the presidential election. So how messy could this get if results take this long for the presidential election?
That's just it. Imagine the chaos in Georgia plus the voting problems in Pennsylvania and multiply that by maybe half a dozen battleground states, and you're looking at the real possibility of not having results on election night that suggest who the next president of the United States is. Election experts I've been talking to, strategists in both parties, say it's a growing possibility, if not a probability, that all of these states changing the laws and all of these complications around accessing the ballot and then counting those votes mean that we are probably not going to know at the end of election night who the next president is. And that, I think, is something that Americans have to adjust to. That's just not something we're used to as a country.
One of the many things we're adjusting to right now. And Rick, I want to talk about the state of the race a little bit as well. A new poll today from Gallup has the president's approval rating at 39%. That's the first time it's been under 40 since last October. And this comes on the heels of a CNN poll showing Biden up 55 to 41%. It's only June. How concerned should the president be?
Well, I think there's growing concern in Republican circles about the state of the presidential race, also Senate campaigns. The president has taken on significant political water in the twin crisis of COVID-19 and the George Floyd killing. And there's no way around that. It is confirmed in every public and private poll. People have been presenting the president with this kind of evidence, with this information. They're hoping to see an adjustment in strategy. Perhaps when he's back on the campaign trail, he's able to turn that around. But these crises have not been good for the standing of the Trump presidency.
All right, political director Rick Klein, we appreciate it, Rick. Thanks. And we're also tracking a strong cold front that has merged with the remnants of Tropical Storm Cristobal, which is sweeping across the country. There's now a severe weather threat facing millions. Rob Marciano, what do we need to know about this storm?
Hey, good evening, Diane. It's been a rough day for severe weather across much of the Midwest and Great Lakes, and that's going to continue over the next few hours. We have multiple severe watch boxes that are up, and there's a moderate chance of seeing more damaging weather. We've already seen winds gusting to 75 miles an hour with some of these squall lines that have moved through Michigan. And then tomorrow, the whole thing kind of spreads out as it gets to the East Coast, so it'll be more widespread and hopefully a little bit less potent as the low itself stays up into Canada. All right, the thunderstorms today have been very intense across parts of Michigan and through Ohio, and these are pushing towards eastern Kentucky and Pennsylvania through the overnight hours. As that happens, they'll weaken somewhat after midnight and then get reinvigorated, I think, during the afternoon hours tomorrow as that front reaches the East Coast. We're just starting to see some increase in humidity and temperature today, and then once the entire thing passes tomorrow night, we get into a more tranquil weather pattern and pretty pleasant, I should say, as we head towards the weekend. But the next 24 to 36 hours, Diane, will be a bit dicey. Back to you.
Major League Soccer has formally announced today it will resume play this summer with the MLS is Back tournament. The league's 26 teams will descend upon Disney's Wide World of Sports complex, with players reporting for training camp on June 24th and matches expected to begin on July 8th. MLS Commissioner Don Garber is joining us now. Commissioner, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Well, here virtually anyway. We appreciate it. So tell me, how did you come to a decision on resuming play, and how do you go about ensuring that your players stay safe?
Well, you know, the decision was one collectively made with our ownership, our players, our various partners, to return in an environment that would be safe by keeping everybody in one neutral location. 26 teams, all the staff in and around them, allows us to be very focused on their health and safety, regular testing, ensuring that we have a sanitized area. So this really was the most effective and most efficient way for us to both get back, but to get back in a safe way.
Now, one of the earlier accounts of COVID-19 here in the U.S. was back in March when 2 members of the Utah Jazz tested positive before a game. What happens if one of your players tests positive during this tournament?
Well, if a player tests positive, they'd be removed from the tournament. They go into quarantine, and then with contact tracing, we would test everybody that's been around that particular player, and they get tested very, very regularly. And if any of them test positive, they get removed from the tournament as well. But that's the plan.
And we also know you're not going to have Disney World completely to yourself this summer. The NBA is also planning to be there when it resumes play. And of course, tourists will start to come back too. So what procedures have you discussed with the NBA and with Disney in terms of sharing the complex?
Well, it's really more that we've discussed with Disney. The NBA will have their hotels, and they'll be playing their games in their location, and we'll be on all the fields that the Disney Wide World of Sports or ESPN Wide World of Sports complex has, and there's so many of them, and those games will take place 3 times a day, every single day. We'll be on our own hotel on the Disney property, and all of the various staff will be in those hotels as well. So Disney's a large property, and they're really good at operational excellence, so that we're really confident that they'll be able to manage both the NBA and us over the period of time we'll both be there together.
And then after the tournament, you plan on continuing the MLS season in the team's home market. So I know it's early, but what precautions do you envision for returning to those home stadiums, and when can fans finally get involved?
Well, you know, the precautions will be very much dictated by how local, state, or provincial authorities, we have teams in Canada, and local authorities will begin to open up facilities and open up sporting locations and any other places where we have large crowds. And we'll follow those guidelines. We'll be testing our players. We'll be having screening for any fans when we're able to have fans into our stadiums. It will start with us waiting to see when, in fact, we'll be permitted to go back into our local markets. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to do that at some point before the end of the year.
I know a lot of fans are too. And on a bit of a different note, you also sit on the U.S. Soccer Board of Directors, which is now discussing, again, the national anthem policy. Megan Rapinoe is one player who's already said that she would kneel during the anthem. The MLS supports players kneeling during the anthem. Do you hope that U.S. Soccer will change its policy? How do you see that playing out?
You know, I do hope they change that policy. I know there's been lots of discussions about that, and the board which I sit on has met, and I know that they're going to come out with a statement as it relates to where the board is coming out and where U.S. Soccer is coming out. But I support an athlete's right to be able to express their point of views during the national anthem.
MLS Commissioner Don Garber, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Oscar-winning film Gone with the Wind has been temporarily pulled from HBO Max. The company says it's pulling the film because of its, quote, racist depictions. But HBO says it will eventually return Gone with the Wind, along with a discussion of its historical context and a denouncement of those depictions. The company says it has no plans to alter the film in any way. And we'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
Right now, how do you make sense of it all? Now, afternoons on ABC, one place with the good information you need.
We are all in this together, and we're going to get through this together.
Pandemic, what you need to know. Afternoons at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. Friday nights, 9, 8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt, True Crime, 2020. Friday nights, 9, 8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News, honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Now, with so much on the line, ABC News, America's #1 news, is right there for you live on Hulu with stories of strength, stories of hope. Because now, when it matters most,
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news.
Hulu has live news, and that news is ABC News.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
ABC News Live on Hulu.
Watch the news you need.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Streaming to all Hulu subscribers right now. ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
Before we go tonight, we want to leave you with the image of the day. NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace, the sport's only black full-time driver, driving a Black Lives Matter car tonight, as the sport says it will no longer allow the Confederate flag at any of its events. That's our show for this hour. Stay tuned for ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Stay safe, America.